Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of DATI, Civic, and Peace Education Audiovisual Series. I am your presenter, Dr. Joseph Tomogaloti Baba Senior, Executive Director and founder of Decantry Artists Theater Incorporated. Today, we are going to be focusing on the historic phase of Liberian culture, episode 13, the historic phase of Liberian culture. Last week, we spoke about the pure traditional Liberian society. We wanted to divide, the history of Liberia into two important segments so that you understood when Liberia existed prior to the time of our recording our history and culture, written history and culture, and the time during which we began to record write our history and culture. So the last episode 12, I spoke about the pure traditional society, and I told you this will be the culture that was authentically African, with no influence from European culture or foreign, cultures, but a culture that was organic, that was just purely African, where the people spoke their languages, everything they did with respect to their immediate environment. But today we want to talk about the historic phase of Liberian culture. And what we are trying to do is to analyze the Liberian conflict and how we can resolve it. Most times people think that they can rebuild Liberia without, actually analyzing what caused the conflict in the first place. And so this is the reason why since 1980 up to this time, Liberia is just going backward and not going forward, because those tenets of democracy, of a Republican form of government, and of the society, if those tenets are not properly addressed, if those tenets are not taken into consideration when making national decisions, definitely, the country cannot go forward. So it's just a waste of time with all the campaigning and all the loud noise that people are making, all the different candidates who are coming in and who don't know about these issues and don't know how to address them. They can never have the ability to resolve the Liberian conflict if they do not delve deeply into the root causes of the Liberian conflict. And here I'm trying to share with you important historical information and important cultural analysis that will give you an idea of what we need to do, to resolve the Liberian conflict peacefully and for us to move forward. There are certain basic tenets of every society that every society must have and must take good care of in order to have a peaceful society. One of them is the language. The language that the people speak to communicate is very important, because in nation building, there must be smooth communication, up and down flow of communication and information from those who rule to those who are governed, and vice versa. And the people too must be able to communicate with their leaders, to let them know that what they want, what they can do, and what their needs are, and vice versa. So language is one of those tenets of every society that you must take good care of. Make sure that the people are able to communicate. The other one is religion. Religion is a very important aspect of every human being. Each human being has its own unique way of worshiping the Most High, the creator of the universe. And so wherever you go, whether that person says he or she does not believe in the existence of God, just the fact that they can discuss that they don't believe in the existence of God means that they are aware that there is a supreme being other than man. And so that aspect of the people's lives is very important because religion, captivates the mind, the body, and the soul of human beings. So when you control the religion, the way how they worship, that can lead to enslaving them mentally. And we have seen over time that religion has been used throughout the world, to subjugate people to hardships, to suppress them, and to do things that would make them to become passive. So religion is one of them. The third tenet of every society is the government. What kind of government, what form of government do you have in your society? That form of government will dictate how the people are governed. It will dictate what the people are supposed to do in response to what their leaders want them to do. You may have a dictatorial type of government that will just tell the people they have no freedoms, and or you may have a democratic form of government that may, recognize the freedoms, the basic freedoms, and liberties of the citizens, etc. So government is also very important when you are analyzing conflict in a society. So we will look at the language, we look at religion, we look at government, and we look at the social customs as well. In Africa, we have so many social customs and practices that may not be in conformity with the culture and customs of the Western world. So we want to analyze what happened when when Western civilization was introduced in Liberia. How did it affect the people? What kind of impact did they have on the lives of ordinary Liberian citizens, especially those who were indigenous Liberians and Africans? How did the customs affect them in terms of the type of marriages? What type of marriage did the Africans practice before the coming of the free slaves? The dress code, what kinds of clothes did they wear? And how did their changing from the clothes they wore back in the days to the clothes they're wearing now, how did that impact on their cultural and social life? The foods they eat, their mannerisms, and all of these things are very important when you're analyzing a culture and a history. Then also the educational system, because in every society, people pass down information from one generation to the next. So what was the educational system like prior to the coming of the settlers to Liberia? What kind of educational system did they have? And when the Western educational system was introduced, how did it impact on the people, the ordinary people, the indigenous people? And why is it that we have a high illiteracy rate in Liberia? And how is this impacting our development? What is the budget for education in Liberia? Is the budget for education in Liberia larger than the budget for the members of the legislature or the members of the executive branch of government? You want to look at those things, that because the educational system is very important. That's the process through which we train future leaders to take over the realm of leadership in the country when the older ones have performed their duties and they can no longer continue, but have to pass the baton on to the younger generation. So what preparations are we making to prepare our youth for to serve as our future leaders? So the educational system is very important. Then the economic system is also very important. Prior to the introduction of Western civilization in Liberia, what was the economic system like? We know from oral tradition that, and even up to today's date, in most of the villages, our traditional people still carry out the barter system, where someone who has rice that wants a little bit of chicken soup will give the neighbor a few cups of rice so that they may be able to get, some chicken soup, to season their pot when they're cooking. That is quite different from the capitalistic economic system that was introduced in Liberia. So we're going to be talking about these things in the historic phase of Liberian culture. So the historic phase of Liberian culture deals with the time when we formally began to write down historical and cultural accounts of events that occurred in Liberia, such as recording the coming of the settlers or the date of the Declaration of Independence, July 26, 1847. In this light, the historic phase of Liberian culture is divided into two important segments. And I want you to listen to this. The first segment is a period of cultural conflict. You may say from 1822 to 1950, for instance, which is a very long time, like over 100 and some more years. There was a cultural conflict. And I will explain to you later on what do I mean by cultural conflict. So the historic period of Liberia is divided into two segments. One is the period of cultural conflict, and the second one is the period of cultural syncretism. So maybe like from 1950 to 2010 or 2022, if you like, there have been some changes in the way how we interact with one another. And our culture has shifted very, very drastically from being authentically African to being a mixture of African and Western culture. So we're talking about that as well. Hence, by critically analyzing these two important eras in our cultural history, we might simply understand the basis of the political upheaval in Liberia today. For instance, one aspect of the cultural conflict was based on linguistic and cultural differences. In this domain, the settlers did not know about the history and cultures of the indigenous people they met in Liberia. Neither could the settlers speak nor understand native Liberian languages. Similarly, the natives also had problems communicating with the settlers because they could not speak or understand English either. Below, I'm going to explain that. So the period of cultural conflict in Liberia consists of many socio and political issues that happened due to cultural differences between the settlers and their native African brothers and sisters. These cultural differences included but were not limited to language, history, religion, covenant structure, social and cultural norms and practices, including clothing, food, mannerisms, etc., systems of education, and the economic system. So let's start first of all with language or linguistic differences. The first thing that happened when the settlers landed in Liberia was to communicate with the people they met. They were speaking English, and the indigenous people they met on the ground were either speaking Gola, speaking Vai, speaking Bassa, speaking Day, speaking any kind of language of the era in which they landed. So there was, the first thing, there was a communication barrier because the settlers were speaking a Western language and the indigenous Liberians were speaking in indigenous languages. So there was a communication barrier. There is no way that any group of people, can understand each other if they don't speak the same language. So definitely that was an issue. And that language difference is still impacting the majority of the Liberian people who do not know how to speak, read, write, at most times understand the English language through which official policies of the Liberian government are communicated to the people of Liberia. So when you are communicating important political, social, and economic messages to the people in a language that they cannot understand, then you don't expect them to be active participants of the activities that you are introducing to them. And most times, people in government take for granted that what they say and the high-flowing English that they use on radio or television will be understood by the ordinary man in Togbili town, in Grand Chile, or in Sanye, in Bon County, or in Bapolu, etc. We must, going forward, we must stop taking for granted that people understand what we are saying in the English language that we speak when we are addressing the citizens of Liberia. Whenever we address the citizens of Liberia as government officials, we must, and it depends on where you are addressing the people. If you are addressing the people in Bon County, you want to make sure that at least you have some interpreters, of the basic languages that are spoken in that region, like Pele, Bassa, Mandingo, Ma, etc. So that what you say will be understood by the citizens. Communication is very important to help us develop our country. So communication is an issue. So language, how do we address that issue about communication so that when we speak, the people will understand what we say to them and that they will respond appropriately for us to develop our country. That's something that the government needs to address. It's very important. You cannot take it for granted. Most times the people are passive and they feel lost because when you speak English to them that they don't understand, and if there's no opportunity to interpret what you are speaking in English in the local vernaculars, then your communication will not be effective. And that's one of the problems that we have, communication. So there's a communication barrier between those who are ruling the country and the people that they rule. And we must address that. That's one of the conflicts. It started from the very beginning. Also, our Liberian languages are disappearing gradually. They are disappearing gradually because we are not speaking them. People are endeavoring to learn how to speak English, and in that process, they mix, their traditional vernacular words up with English words. So they say, like for instance, a crown person would say, you, instead of saying you mina, you would say you cookie mina. Mina would be the spoon, but now because of the influence of the English language, the person is interjecting an English word into the crown language. So it's a cookie mina, instead of saying mina, pidi mina, you're supposed to say pidi mina, cooking spoon, and everything's supposed to be authentic. Pidi mina, not cookie mina, so and most of the languages are like that today. The way how we speak our traditional languages, we mix it up with English words, and that's an effect of what we're going to be discussing later on, which is cultural syncretism. We're mixing both cultures together now. whereas in the beginning, it was so difficult for the people to understand. And because of that communication barrier, that's why there were so many skirmishes between the indigenous ethnic groups and the settlers that negotiated land issues with them, because they had interpreters, but the interpreters were not really fluent, in the English language, and the process of interpreting or information from one language to another is a very complicated process, because different languages apply different figurative, measures, figurative speech that may not be the same in English, for instance, as it would be in Crown. So in the interpretation of a message that someone who is speaking English wants to send out to someone who is speaking Basa or speaking Pele, the interpreter has to really be very crafty to know how to interpret that message so that it is, authentic, and so that it carries the same weight and impact that the speaker who is speaking a different language wants to make on the people he is addressing. So owing to linguistic differences between the settlers and indigenous Liberians, there was a need to use interpreters commonly referred to in Liberian patois as tapita. The old people, they don't know how to say interpreter, so they say tapita. My brother, now you're tapita, like that. It's a word that they want to say interpreter, but they don't know how to pronounce interpreter, and how to spell it. And if they saw it, they wouldn't even know how to read it because they don't know these things. So the language that we use must be properly taught in the schools as well. And then also to preserve our native Liberian languages, we also must offer courses in the schools and in regions where these languages originate from. Like for instance, in Grand Gila, you want to make sure that the students have Kran and Grebo and Mandingo, as electives in the schools, so that through that process they may not totally lose track of their knowledge of their own native languages. Apart from the English language that they are learning in school, they should also learn about the history and culture of their regional ancestors. The other issue that we want to address here is religion. Religion is very, very important in the lives of the people. And besides the issue of communication, conflict in religious beliefs and practices created a bottleneck in our early history as a modern African nation. This was principally since the settlers were mostly Christians who did not recognize the religious beliefs and customs of the natives. The settlers automatically assumed that the natives were atheists or savages or heathens, because the natives worshiped God through cultural and natural symbols, such as the mountains, rivers, creeks, hills, valleys, and through totems and natural attractions that symbolize the presence of the omniscient God. For the natives, God represented or symbolized many things in different forms. Hence, their worship system was quite different from the worship system of the settlers. So you see, also there was another issue. When the settlers came, they came as converted Christians, whereas the indigenous people they met on the ground, some of them, by the time the Christians arrived, some of them were Muslims, because we had the Amorivite, or jihad and things that affected part of North and Northwestern Africa, and it came all the way down, to Morocco, to Mauritania, Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, and a little bit of Liberia, So by that time, we have Muslims here also, but we basically largely had uh, a Judaic type of worship, Jewish type of worship system by majority of the people, or especially the Kwa speaking group. The Kwa speaking group believed in only one true God. They didn't know anything about God's son called Jesus Christ, but they believed in God, and they worship God in so many different ways. For instance, the Kwas had the oracle in the Putu Mountains, and the Krus, the Krans, the Grebels, the Pasas, the Dewians, from time to time will make pilgrimage to the Putu Mountain to make sacrifices, to appease God and the spirits of our ancestors and all of that. And these ethnic groups, Kwa ethnic groups, have high priests. They establish shrines where they worshipped and all of that. So their worship system was different from the worship system of those who came from the United States. And that created a conflict. And it still does create a conflict. So how did it create that conflict? Was that first of all, the settlers felt that their brothers and sisters, indigenous brothers and sisters, were quote unquote lost. They were not saved. They were unsaved because they were not worshiping the way how they were worshiping. And that created a whole lot of, cultural conflict in terms of for instance, denigrating traditional Liberian history and culture and the practices, telling the people that they were worshiping false gods, telling them if you want to be saved, then you must burn all of your relics and all of the things you inherited from your ancestors in order for you to be saved. And people were burning, masks. They were burning all kinds of artifacts, valuable artifacts that were thousands of years old, simply because that was the only way they could have been accepted in the system. So religion was used to a large extent to suppress the majority of the people. It was not used to liberate them, as Christianity actually ought to do. When you receive Christ and when you are a born again Christian, hopefully you should be, in a position where you become assertive. You are sure of yourself, and that you will stand up for justice and truth as Jesus Christ did. But unfortunately, a lot of those things did not happen that way. The religion was used to suppress the majority of the people and to denigrate the history and culture. So there was a lot of destruction done on valuable artifacts during this period of cultural conflict. So therefore, and whereas a democratic Republican form of government was in place, and what this means when you have a democratic or Republican form of government in place is that you must respect the dignity of the human person. You must respect cultural diversity. In this case, cultural diversity wasn't respected. They did not practice cultural diversity. You either became what those in power wanted you to be, or you will not be part of the system. So that created a lot of problems as well. So religion is something that people have been using, and I will be speaking on religion as a separate, topic for us to kind of analyze how that is affecting the Liberian society and the conflict that is taking place in Liberia. The type of religion, the type of preaching that people do on the pulpit how that affects, the minds of the young people as well as the older people. When you tell someone that in order for you to be saved, you have to pay for holy water. I don't know what that is. And or where you as an individual, instead of getting on your knees to pray for yourself, you are depending on someone else to pray for you. That kind of dependency, has created a lot of socio-cultural problems in the Liberian society. So we will address that, individually. The other conflict that still exists that people are confused about is the governance structure, the government that was introduced. Prior to the coming of the free slaves to Liberia, the indigenous people were ruled by kings. So the monarchical form of government is different from the Republican democratic form of government. The monarchical form of government, the king is like the absolute decision maker. He's the ruler. Whatever he says, that's it. No questions asked. He may have a council of elders who may advise him from time to time, but he is the ultimate decision maker in that society. It's quite different from the Republican democratic form of government, where you now have three but separate equal branches of government. And even at that, most of the time, the executive branch wields more political power, more economic and social power than the rest of the other two branches. And in recent times, you have seen how the legislative branch of government has kind of really, dominated the decision-making process, especially in the distribution of the meager financial resources of the country, to the detriment of the majority of the Liberian people. So this also is an issue that Liberians are confronted with. They have been confronted with it from day one when the government, this type of government was introduced. And so that's why you had a lot of resistance that took place on the Crew Coast, among the Kwa people, the Crown, the Gribble, the Crew. They resisted, the expansion of the Liberian government in their regions for quite some time. It took over 100 years plus, for the peoples in the hinterland of Liberia to be integrated into the Liberian system, to become fully represented in the national legislature and all of that. So that also is an issue. That's why it's important to provide civic education for the people of Liberia, for them to understand what type of government system we have in Liberia, and how that is impacting their livelihood. They don't understand these things. Most of the people never had the opportunity to get online and vote. They don't know how to cast their ballots. All these things are things that we are overlooking, and we think that by replacing one leader with another, that the problem will be solved. No, the problem cannot be solved in that way. We must address the elephant in the room. And those elephants, there are several elephants: the religion, the language, the government. Then we come to the social customs. We found out that when the settlers came in, they first of all, they practiced monogamy. Let's look at the marriage system. In the traditional African society, men are allowed to marry as many women as they can afford. That has always been a practice from the beginning of time. Even Abraham, had several wives, and so forth. So that's something that we inherited from our ancestors centuries and millennia ago. So when the settlers came in with their one man, one wife concept of marriage, that coincided, conflicted with the traditional concept of marriage, wherein a man was entitled to as many wives as he could afford. That's one aspect of it. The clothes that they wore, the way how they dressed, the women wore dresses, head gears and all of that. The men wore coat suits with tie, bow, all those kinds of things. That's the way how the traditional people dressed was different. They wore their bomber, they wore their gowns, they wore, the women wore their bubas and lapas and all of that. So there were social differences as well. Their mannerisms were quite different as well. The way how the foods they ate, the traditional foods that they ate and the foods that the settlers, ate, they were a little different. And then gradually, they started, sharing ideas in the kitchen and all those kinds of things. But that again created a problem because up to the time when I was a child, and even up to until Taba became, president of Liberia, the official dress code at all official functions, that were spearheaded by the government, you had to be dressed in a Western form of, of attire to attend these functions. So that in itself denigrated the culture, the history of the indigenous people who were in the majority. And that, was something that people had to battle with. If you wore a traditional African gown or a shirt, during my days when I was a child, people would laugh at you. They would mock you and say, "Oh, look at you, your country." That's where all this idea about country and Congo came from. Because if you wore things that represented your traditional culture, you were termed as country. But if you wore something that was Western, like a coat suit, a tie and all of that, then you were considered quote unquote civilized, which of course is the misuse of that word civilized, because that's not what civilization means, but that again was a way to kind of put down what was authentically Liberian or authentically African. So that in itself also created a problem. So in the African society, polygamy was practiced, and polygamy has different sects. In polygamy you have polygyny. Polygyny is when a man is entitled, when a man can have more than one wife. That's polygyny, Polygyny, polygyny. And polyandry is when a woman can have one or two, more than one husband. That is kind of a very rare to find, but it's a custom that is practiced among siblings who are very, very, very close. They will kind of swap wives and all of that. But it's uncommon, nowadays. But that was the system. So that again had created some social problems. Even those who were the so-called civilized people started having affairs with other women and having children outside children, they call them, all of that, because that's just the African, trait, especially for African men. So, but just to let you know that the traditions were kind of different, and that in itself is something that we will discuss in the period of cultural syncretism, as we go on. So all these things are different than the traditional African society, as I said before, because of the vernacular, the language that they speak. There are certain words that are not, visible, or that do not exist in the various ethnic group languages. such as uncle, nephew, auntie, niece, in the traditional man, you are either his brother or his sister, or you are his son or his daughter. They don't have nephew, this and that. Even if you were the son of the brother, you will refer to your uncle as father or your aunt as mother. So that concept, also the mentality also was quite different. Then we have the educational system. The educational system is very important in building a nation and preparing a people to actively engage them in national development. So the curriculum now, or when you talk about the educational system, the traditional people had their own educational system before the settlers arrived in Liberia. So to look at them and say, oh, they're not educated, they are illiterate, that is incorrect. It's incorrect for anyone to say that, because the traditional people were well educated. They were very educated on how to live in their immediate environment. And they did a very great job, responding to circumstances in their immediate environment and living at peace with nature and themselves. So the educational system, or traditional educational system, was established in the form of not co-educational institutions, but institutions that were strictly for boys, institutions that were strictly for girls, etc. So for instance, you had a poro for men, for boys, where they went to learn about the things that men in the society, in their culture, in their environment needed to know. And they had the Sandy, where the women were sent to learn the things about womanhood. And so when they came out, they were quite prepared, because they had great professors and instructors who instructed them on these different cultural aspects of life in their community, in their society, that they were now prepared to come and live, and live a peaceful and fruitful life. And they did. And because of the educational system, the curriculum that it provided was culturally relevant, these people were able to respond to all kinds of predicaments, in their immediate environment. And they learned trades. They learned things, crafts that they could use to earn honest livelihoods without, unlike the Western educational system, where you spend over 12 years learning how to read and write. And when you get out of the ordinary educational system in Liberia, you don't even know anything about electricity. You don't know how plumbing. You don't have any skills of that kind other than just to read and write. But even at this time now, because of the poor educational system and the lack of support, national support from the government, and the low budget, educational budget in the country, people graduate from high school and even college and cannot read at second grade level. So that also, again, is very unfortunate, because in order for us to really resolve the Liberian conflict, we must address that from the educational standpoint. And that educational standpoint requires a revamping of the reconceptualizing the curriculum, national curriculum of Liberia, so that it be culturally relevant. And we must, insert in the curriculum, cultural and traditional beliefs and practices to preserve our history and culture, and to educate Liberians to be prepared to face, the challenges of the time, of the changing times in Liberia. So that's the educational system. So we have an educational system that you you go to school in Liberia from ABC, SOSO, all the way to a master's degree level, and you don't even know where Swakoko is located in Liberia. You don't know much about yourself, but you are taught things about Europe. You know where Paris is, you know where London is, you know where Lisbon is, you know where Washington, D.C. is, but you don't know where Pulu is. You know, that type of educational is malfunctional. And that type of education does not instill in you the patriotism that you need to become someone who loves his country and all of that. So as a result, many so-called educational Liberians are detached from their history and culture. And when you are detached from your history and culture, you know, then you become a don't care person. Our history, our culture teaches us to be honest, to be men and women of integrity. So, you know, and back in the day when we were coming up, every child represented his family, his parents, and the name, your family name was very important. You couldn't just get up, you know, and go and do something out there. They would say, oh, that's that Baba child, that Baba boy, you know, the boy from the Baba family. So everybody protected their families and wanted to do the best that they could, you know, to represent their family, you know, honorably. Well, unfortunately, here we are, you know, where people steal public funds and think it is funny, you know, where people are hailed because they squandered millions of dollars that are supposed to go towards national development, you know. So that's an aftermath of not appreciating your culture, of not knowing who you are. Because if you know who you are, you would keep your integrity as the name of your family, you know, you would keep that integrity and you would do what you're supposed to do that is right for the people to benefit from you. So the educational system, you know, is also part of the conflict. So if we talk about resolving the Liberian conflict, you know, that's something that we really need to invest a lot of money in the educational system, because the orientation of the people, the young people, must be trained in a way where they develop love and appreciation for the country, and they want to go all out to do whatever they can to improve, you know, and develop Liberia. But to do that, you know, it requires that we address these different cultural conflicts that we are faced with. Then the next phase of the historic period of Liberian culture is called the cultural syncretism. Now, this is where we are right now in the Liberian society. We're at a stage where we blend both African and Western beliefs and cultures. Sometimes when we dress, you know, like the Grebo people, when they dress, they will tie the lapa and they wear the coat suit. You know, that's cultural syncretism, meaning that the coat there is Western, but the lapa that they tie around them is African. So that's where we are right now. We're at a stage where most of us, you know, have, you know, accepted the Western way of life, but some of us do also retain some of our cultural beliefs and practices. And so we're at a stage where that is called cultural syncretism. And by cultural syncretism, I mean the period in Liberian history when settlers and natives started interacting with each other more intimately through intermarriage, religion, sports, education, government, goodwill visits to one another's homes, towns, and villages. And when settlers and natives started building confidence in each other as citizens of the same nation. Now, this aspect of our culture and history is very important. This is where we are. Many of us are intermarried. We have children who have cultural, who have traditional Liberian background and American Liberian or Congo background. We have a lot of people that fall in that category nowadays. And because of that, now we have to we must get together to decide how we go forward, because it's not like before. So this issue about country versus Congo, that's not the issue at all that's prolonging the Liberian conflict. The issue is that those who are in the forefront just don't understand the tenets of the society, things that are supposed to be the foundation of the society that are not properly established. And because they're not properly established, that's why our society is crumbling. And some of those things include, how do we address the communication issue with respect to language? How do we address the issue of religion, so that people are not exploiting the poor people, the suffering people, to tell them that they must sit down and wait for God to do things for them when they can do things for themselves? Or the type of government that we have in place. If we say we are a democratic Republican form of government, then we need to practice, the terms of reference of that type of government, which involves, appreciation of cultural diversity, freedoms, basic human freedoms, and even distribution of the wealth of the country, so that the people benefit, the taxpayers benefit from the taxes that they pay to government. And then also our special customs, or how do we appreciate one another as Liberians, instead of looking at one another as different people and forcing them on ourselves. And then the educational system, with respect to what we teach our children moving forward, so that they can develop, love and appreciation for Liberia and Liberian cultural heritage. And then, of course, the economic system is something also that we need to constantly work with, to see how we can use the meager resources we have in our country, for the good, the common good of all Liberians, and not just a handful of people. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to say thank you so much for listening to this edition of DATI Civic and Peace Education Audiovisual Series. This has been your presenter, Dr. Joseph Tomogalati Baba, Executive Director and Founder of Decorative Artists Theater, saying thanks once again and goodbye for now.